If you're trying to argue against the Trans Mountain Pipeline, you've got a few compelling points to work with. You could make a money argument that coastal communities stand to gain little from the project while shouldering most of the risk. You could make a climate argument. Alberta oil has a higher carbon footprint, so kill the pipeline to leave it in the ground. And hey, maybe engineers will perfect that system to ship bitumen in the form of spill-proof pucks, making this whole pipeline thing unnecessary. Despite all this, one of the most common arguments against the Trans Mountain expansion is also one of the most ridiculous: that the pipeline expansion will drive killer whales to extinction. Specifically, the southern resident killer whales, an endangered population of fewer than 80 orcas that spend a lot of their time in the Salish Sea. Groups like Life Force, Lead Now, EcoJustice, and the Raincoast Conservation Foundation are all telling people that if Trans Mountain goes ahead, the whales are doomed. Fortunately for everyone, whales included, their reasoning is really specious. And here's why. In the rare event of a major supertanker spill, yeah, that wouldn't be good for anything in the water. A major spill would probably kill about half the southern resident killer whales. But that's not the argument being made. The argument is that the mere presence of extra ships will add just that extra bit of stress to drive the southern resident killer whales to extinction even without a spill. That might make sense if the Salish Sea wasn't already completely filled with ships. Ferries, pleasure boats, fishing vessels, fuel barges, all those tankers from that massive LNG thing BC just approved. The Port of Vancouver alone is expected to process 6,500 vessels per year by the year 2026. Of those, only 5% would represent Trans Mountain tankers. If you're worried about orcas getting hit by ships, oil tankers leaving from Burnaby are not your enemy here. A 2010 study found that 10 orcas were struck by ships in BC waters between 1995 and 2006. All of those strikes happened in narrow channels far away from anywhere the Trans Mountain tankers will be sailing. Another problem is noise. Whales navigate using echolocation, a kind of natural sonar. Noise pollution screws this up, and they're not able to feed as well. But echolocation happens in higher frequencies, whereas big ships like oil tankers generate low-frequency noise. The boats more likely to be harassing whales are smaller, whinier vessels like speedboats, fishing boats, and BC's robust whale-watching industry. And remember the increased risk of an oil spill that I mentioned earlier? There are already a crapload of oil tankers in the Salish Sea that nobody seems to care about. Washington State gets half of its oil from Alaskan tankers, many of whom follow basically the same route as would be followed by Trans Mountain vessels. The Exxon Valdez, yeah, that was an Alaskan tanker headed to the US West Coast. A single Washington State refinery, Cherry Point, located within sight of Surrey, currently processes about as many vessels as would be heading to the terminus of a Trans Mountain expansion. Despite this, nobody seems to be accusing Washington of dooming the orcas. You know what's really driving the whales to extinction? The journal Nature looked into this 2 years ago, and they determined that while noise was one of several issues, the number one thing killing the whales is a lack of Chinook salmon. So if you really want to save the southern resident killer whales, just tell commercial, sports, and indigenous fishers they can't catch as many salmon. But that's hard, isn't it? People out of work, communities unable to make a living, it would probably be pretty controversial. It's so much easier when the job losses are over the Rocky Mountains.